Today's News Talk Radio, TNT.
And welcome to today's program. I'm delighted to say I'm joined by Marcus Papadopoulos, author, historian, and broadcaster, and one of the sharpest minds on the block, if I may say so. Now, first, I want to get into the Olympics, but to just what I was saying there before our very brief break, would you agree with me that Kamala Harris, though she hasn't picked her running mate yet, is more likely to win the November election, or rather, let me change that and say more likely to be installed as President of the United States in January than Donald J. Trump now?
I believe it is inconceivable that if the forthcoming American presidential election is free and fair, that Donald Trump will not win. Only he will be denied the White House if the American ruling elite or the American establishment, however you wish to describe those who rule America, fiddle at the election as they did in 2020. I was recently in America, specifically Florida, and almost every person I spoke to, including a number of Democrats, said that nothing can stand in the way of Donald Trump, apart from if the powers that be in Washington, D.C. steal the election as they did in 2020. Kamala Harris, like the vast majority of other politicians in America and like the vast majority of politicians in Britain, is a complete and utter non-entity. She is useless with a capital U. And that is another demonstration of how the Western world has fallen.
Well, strong words, Marcus. I do think the 2020 election was stolen. There's no doubt about that. So therefore, as a result, with polls in the swing states now showing Kamala neck and neck, we saw that favorability rating chart. I've seen similar polls looking at Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Michigan, the key swing states in the Midwest, saying she is at least neck and neck with Donald Trump. Now, I fully take on board what you were saying about Florida, but if they go into polling day neck and neck, I think the national security states, etc., the powers that be in Washington, will rig things in favor of Harris if they need to. And of course, it'll be easy to paint Trump as a two-time loser. Sour grapes again from him. He's been making remarks about how Christians will never need to vote again. He's still such a loose cannon. He can't really be trusted. And what's more, if he starts claiming once again that the election was stolen, well, then they'll just have to lock him up, won't they, Marcus?
Do I trust the results of opinion polls? No, I do not. Why? Because essentially the people who own and operate Western mainstream media are the same people who own and operate these polling companies. Polling companies, like the media, is a potent weapon at the disposal of the Western ruling elites. These opinion polls in America are simply inconceivable that within a few days, Kamala Harris, who has no standing in America, even amongst a lot of Democrats, and I mean good traditional liberal Democrats, want to see the back of her as much as they want to see the back of Biden and the Clintons and the Obamas. So I am of the firm opinion that these opinion polls are not accurate. I believe they have been put out to try and encourage as many people as possible into thinking that Donald Trump can be defeated. You must turn up on the day of the election. You must vote. And that way, Donald Trump can be defeated. We must be very, very suspicious of opinion polls for the reasons I stated.
It was an unlikely alliance that got Harris the nomination so quickly. Donna Brazile, twice formerly chair of the DNC, Karen Finney, the former Clinton campaign spokesperson, now an ABC pundit, Jotaka Edie, founder of Win with Black Women, and her cohorts, Holly Holiday, Christina Q, Chantel Mullen, Edwina Ward, and Holly Weeks. People talk about elites in America, but it was black women caucusing on Kamala's behalf in the immediate aftermath of Biden's announcement that got Harris the nomination. Well, the other potential candidates, the Gretchen Whitmers, Gavin Newsoms, Josh Shapiro's of this world, were all sitting around on their hands. It was a really quite remarkable couple of days, wasn't it, Marcus?
Yes, it was. But I would go one step back and ask, where did Kamala Harris come from? Because all of a sudden, a few years ago, she emerges on the scene and she becomes the vice president. No different to how Obama all of a sudden emerged on the scene and within a few years was president. No different to how in Britain, Sunak arrived on the scene and within a very short period of time was prime minister. No different to how Starmer, within a very short period of time, emerged on the scene and within a short period of time, again, he became prime minister. These people are utterly incompetent. As I said moments ago, they are non-entities. They have no loyalty to the American people or to the British people. They have no love for the cultural and spiritual values of the American people and the British people. They have been groomed. They have been prepared by the Western ruling elite or the globalists. Again, however you want to describe those who rule the Western world. These people, the Harrises, the Sunaks, and the Starmers, for example, they are merely puppets. They are useful idiots. They are inflicting enormous damage both in America and in Britain. And yes, they should be removed and put before a court of law. But we must never lose sight of the fact that they are puppets. If you want to destroy the cancer which is devouring both America and Britain, you have to go for the puppet masters, which means you have to identify who the puppet masters are. And therein lies a challenge for a great many Americans and a great many Britons.
Yes, exactly. We're digressing a little bit, but it's fun to do so, Marcus, particularly in the case of Keir Starmer. I've got my suspicions that declassified the crusading journalistic website have their suspicions too as to whether or not he is actually an asset of the UK national security state.
Let's be absolutely candid. There are many politicians and journalists in Britain and in America who are the eyes and ears for British intelligence and American intelligence. If you just take Britain under the current government, a so-called Labour one, under the previous government, a so-called Conservative one, neither did or have done anything which is conducive to the British people. And when I say the British people, I mean the British people. The British people are comprised of four nations: the English, the Scottish, the Welsh, and the Northern Irish. I could be born in the sea, but that would not make me a fish. So again, all of the policies, all of the actions taken by successive British governments have been against the British national identity. They have not been in the interests of the British people. They are serving the interests of those who hate the British people, who hate the heritage of the British people, who hate the religion of the British people. We recently saw the diabolical opening ceremony of the Paris Olympics, in which a key moment in Christianity, the Last Supper, was brutally, horrifically mocked. Yet, has Starmer issued a statement condemning that? No. Has Charles III issued a statement condemning that? No. Has the Archbishop of Canterbury issued a statement condemning that? No. Those three, for example, keep on coming out with the same bile that Britain is about tolerance, equality, inclusivity, and respect. And yet millions of British people who are Christians were horrifically offended by the opening ceremony of the Paris Olympics. And yet, none of those three people, Charles III, Starmer, or Welby, have condemned what happened at the Paris Olympics. If Judaism or Islam or Sikhism or Hinduism had been mocked, then you can bet your life that all three of those men, again, Starmer, Welby, and Charles III, would have been out within a few minutes condemning the act and saying that the Muslims or the Sikhs or the Jews and the Hindus of Britain must have their faith respected. But of course, if you're Christian, your faith is not respected, because what we are seeing in part in the Western world is an anti-Christian agenda.
I have to say, I agree with you. I mean, it has many facets. The assault on the family, of course, being just one of them. But in Welby's case, he can't even condemn a genocide. So we can't really expect him to condemn men in dresses, or a depiction of Dionysius, it was, I believe, who was supposed to represent the futility of violence amongst men. We'll come back to the Olympic ceremony opening after this very short break.
We don't rock, we talk. Today's News Talk, TNT.
Welcome back to the program, where I'm delighted to say I'm joined by Marcus Papadopoulos, and the fallout from the Olympic Games opening ceremony rumbles on. Anne Descamps, the communications director for the Games, said there was never any intention to disrespect any religious group whatsoever. And the offending scene, they're claiming, was a depiction of Greek gods enjoying a party, and not of Jesus Christ and his followers. Do you think they're trying to shut the door after the horse has bolted, Marcus?
No, I don't. I believe they are mocking us. They are mocking us. The mask has come off in the last few years. The people who arranged and approved the opening ceremony of the Paris Olympics did not do so on their own accord. The Western ruling elites have penetrated, subverted, and wielded as a weapon every aspect of life in the Western world, every single institution in the Western world, from the judiciary to the police to science to sports. And as I said, they are using those aspects of life and institutions as a weapon against the indigenous populations of the Western world. If they really, really are sorry for the opening ceremony, then they would issue a statement unequivocally saying that Christianity was mocked. It is an unforgivable act. The actors will be ensured they will never participate in such acts again, and some sort of penance would be carried out. But of course, that is not happening. And the frightening thing, Basil, is this. What we saw at the Paris Olympics, the mocking of a key moment in Christianity, is quite tame compared to other acts of mockery of Christianity, which we see occurring in all places in the Western world. I will not go into details because you and your audience are intelligent enough to look into it for yourselves, but there are photographs on the internet in America, for example, in Canada, of crosses and crucifixes being used in the most abominable, the most devilish of situations. So again, Christianity is under attack. Christianity is on the decline throughout the Western world. And in Britain, has Charles III or Elizabeth II ever even expressed sadness at the decline of Christianity? No. Is that not worrying, given that they are supposed to be the defender of the faith? Has Welby ever expressed sadness or regret at the decline of Christianity in Britain? No. That, again, is extremely worrying, given that he is the Archbishop of Canterbury. So what is abundantly clear to me and millions of other people in the Western world is that Christianity is under attack. Our way of life in the Western world is under attack. Western civilization is under attack. The courts, the politicians, the journalists, the police, etc., will not come to defend us because they are against us. So it is down to Christians to come together and to defend their faith, as it is said throughout the New Testament.
Thomas Jolly, I've just seen a picture of him, the creative director of the ceremony, remarkably young looking. He looks about 28, maybe 30 years old at the most. I might be wrong, but does seem extraordinary to entrust such an important cultural event to someone so inexperienced. He said, "I did not intend to be subversive or to mock or shock. In France, we can believe or not believe. We have a lot of rights, and I wanted to convey those values throughout the ceremony." They have apologized to Christians, saying there was no intention of blaspheming. Of course, France, once known as the eldest daughter of the church. I don't know if you knew that. We've come a long way from those days, haven't we? And yes, you're right. King Charles, he talked about himself as the defender of faiths before ascending the throne, and seems to have little to no interest in Christianity, while the Archbishop of Canterbury, well, he's barely Christian himself, is he? I mean, in my lifetime, since I was an adolescent, we've seen something verging on the collapse of the Church of England, frankly, Marcus.
It is a horrific state of affairs. And what I find refreshing, even at this most dire of times for Western civilization, is that tens of millions of ordinary people across the Western world are waking up. There is a great awakening. And the catalyst for that was the COVID narrative, or the COVID lies. So whilst things in the Western world at the moment are diabolical, and I mean, I use the word diabolical in a biblical context. So, for example, we see paedophilia being rebranded as minor attracted people. Millions of people in the Western world have woken up. The problem is this, Basil. It is one thing to acquire knowledge, but what will you do with that knowledge? Will you moan about it over a cup of tea at home? Will you moan over it? Will you moan about it over a pint of beer in the pub? That's not good enough. Taking part in sham elections in Britain, for example, will achieve nothing, because, as I said, the recent British general election was a sham election. But Labour, the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats, fundamentally speaking, they all believe in the same thing. They are all pro-BLM. They are all pro-LGBTQ. They are all pro-immigrant. They are all pro-BLM. They are all pro-Israel. They are all pro-climate change. They are all pro-COVID lockdowns. They are all anti-Russia. They are all pro-Israel, and so on and so on and so on. They form a uni-party. So, alas, Britain is not a democracy. Britain is a tyranny and a kleptocracy, but an extremely clever tyranny. North Korea is a stupid tyranny, but the British form of tyranny is exceptionally clever, exceptionally devious, and it has an enormous amount of cosmetic surgery to conceal the tyranny. And of course, the British mainstream media is at the heart of Western mainstream media, and Western mainstream media is a multi-billion-dollar industry which has enormous, tremendous leverage in all four corners of the world. So yes, things are terrible in Britain and across the whole of the Western world, but people are waking up. But as I said, what will they do with that knowledge? The unthinkable is happening before our very eyes. In the summer of 2020, BLM thugs desecrated the cenotaph. Not one arrest was made. A few months later, Elizabeth II, through her spokesperson, expresses, and I quote, sympathy with BLM. What does that tell you? That tells you that the heart of the British state, the monarchy and the aristocracy is against the British people. Only only powers that be, which annihilate the national identity of the people whom they govern, or to be more precise, rule. If they do that, then they hate the indigenous population of their country.
I certainly think that we have a political class that have become completely divorced from the wishes of ordinary people, and occasionally the ordinary people rebel, hence the Brexit vote. On the other hand, the general election we've just had was the dampest of damp squibs with a miserable turnout, and a Labour Party achieving a landslide victory, even though their share of the vote went down from polls of 42% to a derisory 34% by election day. It wasn't a ringing endorsement of Keir Starmer at all. If anything, it was a rejection. We're going to take a short break now from the headlines. When we come back, a little bit more about the opening ceremony. Then I'll be asking Marcus whether or not there is any chance for peace in the Ukraine. We'll be right back after this short break.
Get stuck in our web.
TNTRadio.live.
And welcome back to the Patrick Henningsen Show, with me sitting in for Patrick, who is on an extended leave of absence, but will be back in due course. I'm delighted to say I'm joined by Marcus Papadopoulos. Marcus, Zelensky wants more money. He's asking Britain in particular, and our new leader, the one we've all endorsed so enthusiastically, Sir Keir Starmer, has said Britain will continue to support Ukraine for as long as it takes. Meanwhile, Sergei Lavrov says the West is in cloud cuckoo land if he thinks that Russia's objectives are not going to be met. There must be a way out of this dreadful morass sooner rather than later. Surely, Marcus.
Well, Basil, as I said moments ago, the British state makes decisions which are not in the interests of the British people. There are 14 million Britons living below the poverty line, living below the breadline in Britain. There are over 400,000 homeless people in Britain, and yet Johnson, Sunak, and now Starmer consider it acceptable to send billions of pounds to a foreign leader instead of ensuring that each and every penny of that money stays in Britain and stays in Britain to look after the most vulnerable people in Britain. That is why I say the British ruling elite is anti-British. Regarding the war in Ukraine, well, this is a war which could have been avoided. This war came about as a result of NATO expansion, something which has been ongoing since the late 1990s, something which was told by Gorbachev in 1990 in return for the Soviet Union allowing German reunification. NATO would not expand, quote, 1 inch eastwards beyond Germany's eastern borders. But Gorbachev, being the inept fool that he was, never got the West to put it into writing, though we have a lot of primary evidence to corroborate that verbal assurance was given to Gorbachev. But NATO is not a defensive, peaceful bloc. It demonstrated its criminal nature in 1999 when it bombed the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia. Because when it bombed Yugoslavia, it didn't just violate international law. It violated Article 1 of NATO's own founding treaty, the North Atlantic Treaty, which stipulates that NATO will never use force to resolve a dispute. And then NATO was assisting Islamist terrorists in Libya and then assisting Islamist terrorists in Syria. And NATO is on the western borders of the Russian Federation to try and enclose Russia on its western borders, knowing that if Russia is enclosed in Europe, it will become weakened in Europe and thereby weakened in the world. Now that the Russian army is in Ukraine, nothing will dislodge it. The Russian government, the Russian people are prepared, as they have done so throughout history, to make whatever sacrifices are necessary to ensure that the motherland, Mother Russia, is defended. So if need be, the Russian people would accept hundreds of thousands, millions of Russian soldiers dying in Ukraine, if that ensures that the lands which comprise Ukraine never fall under the control of NATO. Now, it won't come to that where hundreds of thousands of millions of Russians will die. In regard to Zelensky talking about peace, Zelensky is not a free agent. He was selected by the Western ruling elites. He was put into power by the Western ruling elites. He is nothing but a puppet. When he speaks, he is conveying the words of the Western ruling elites, be it the Americans, the British, or the Europeans. I believe going forward, Basil, the West will still try to inflict a strategic defeat on Russia, but nothing can stop the Russian military. The Russian military-industrial complex is absolutely gigantic. Indeed, it is even bigger than the American military-industrial complex. And the Russian military is not just bleeding to death NATO's Ukrainian army, it is bleeding to death by proxy NATO. Look at the stockpiles of America. Look at the stockpiles of Canada and Britain. They have been severely depleted. The Russians, on the other hand, let's just say in 1 week, they lose 100 tanks, which they haven't, but hypothetically speaking, in 1 week, they lose 100 tanks. The next week, there'll be another 100 tanks there because Russian armaments factories are enormous. Russian armaments factories are the size or even bigger of towns in America and Britain. Magnitogorsk is an example of that. So unfortunately, whilst I wish that the war in Ukraine would be resolved peacefully, diplomatically, I do not believe that the West has any intention of doing so. So the war will go on. It will not go on for years and years. I believe it will end sooner rather than later. And either all of Ukraine or most of the lands which comprise Ukraine will be captured by the Russian army and will be absorbed into the Russian Federation.
Let's just hope it doesn't end with a mushroom cloud. But unfortunately, this segment has to end. Marcus Papadopoulos, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon on today's News Talk.
It's my pleasure. Thank you, Basil.
We're going to take a very short break now. When we come back, I'll be asking former British Ambassador to Syria, Peter Ford, is Labour's new foreign policy any different from the Conservatives, particularly with respect to the genocide in Gaza? We'll be right back.
We don't rock, we talk. Today's News Talk, TNT Radio.